Check Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Chamber Chats, coming to you as always from the podcasting studios here at the Czech Media Group, one of our chamber champions. I would like to acknowledge, as always, that I live and work in the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking nations known to us as Songhees and Esquimalt or Cosapsum. And Chamber Chats is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union, who are redefining what banking can do for people, for community, and for the world. So we've been talking a little bit about things that happen in our blue economy, the marine economy. I mean, we live on the water, we live on the ocean. There's a lot of things that revolve around that. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is a company here that has found themselves a niche in the world of security. Now, security covers a whole bunch of things. I mean, we've talked about public safety and those things too, but protecting people's property, protecting and stewarding the earth and the waters, that's what we're going to talk about today with Brandon Wright. Brandon is the CEO of a company called Barnacle Systems. Brandon, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
That's a very seaworthy name to be called Barnacle.
That's right.
As we can see on your shirt, though, it's BRNKL.
Yep. Yeah, we couldn't afford a vowel and we didn't know how to spell. So
We have to go on Wheel of Fortune here on Czech sometime. Maybe you can do that.
exactly. Yeah, you got it. You're the right demographic to know our Wheel of Fortune joke.
There you go. Okay, so very often on this program, what we do is we say to somebody like you, so you meet somebody for the first time, they say, what do you do? You say, oh, I operate a company called Barnacle. And they say, really, what's Barnacle? What do you tell them?
Absolutely. So we're a security monitoring company for boats. So essentially, you take a piece of hardware that we've developed, you place it on board your boat, and you can remotely monitor your boat from your smartphone, tablet, or computer. So it's kind of like a home security system, but for your boat.
So tell me about the whole concept and the startup for that thing. Why did you say, yeah, we should do that?
Yeah, so back in 2017, my personal sailboat, anchored in beautiful Mill Bay, British Columbia, decided to drag anchor in the middle of the night and floated to shore and never told me. And it was incredibly embarrassing for me at the time because my background, fairly unique for an islander, is I used to develop remote monitoring equipment for the CIA and US Air Force. And so I spent 7 years commuting to the Middle East, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, all over the place, doing armored vehicles, providing remote monitoring equipment on those so they could get real-time health monitoring, but I couldn't remotely monitor my own boat. So I went online, looked around for a product to put on my boat, and didn't see one at the time. So here we are, 7 years later.
So you have clearance to talk about that CIA stuff and everything, right? We're not.
I don't know, might have to kill you afterwards. But let's see.
I just want to unpack that for a second. So what were you doing to connect with the CIA?
Yeah, so I worked for a company called Fleur, and it went through a couple iterations. I was with a small business in Victoria called 360 Surveillance, and it got acquired. Then that company got acquired, and I really chose to take the corporate elevator as opposed to the corporate ladder, where I just volunteered to go on any project, any job site that they had other people that didn't want to go, and that took me to some pretty nasty places during wartime, of course. And just by taking that risk and volunteering myself to be in those different situations, I was able to get some really unique opportunities and into some really unique projects.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, so the sailboat drags anchor. Then you say, I didn't know about that. I should have known about that. I would like to know about that in the future. Tell me about the next steps then when you start to build Barnacle. What did you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I'm an electrical engineer, and I got my degree at the University of Victoria. And yeah, I thought, all right, well, if nothing exists, and by the way, at the time, my wife was a stay-at-home mom. My daughter was 2 years old, the perfect time to quit a job.
Yeah.
But I built a small prototype of a piece of hardware that I wanted to put on my boat and start marketing it, and really just pushed really hard on that. Built the first version of the hardware, built the first version of the app, and all the software that goes into the hardware just to get it off the ground, and experimented with the market, did the Vancouver Boat Show, things like that. Slowly was able to start hiring employees based off of the cash flow that we were generating from those early sales. But honestly, one of the big factors was going in with Viatech, the startup accelerator here in Victoria, and getting a mentor, Mark Grambart, to support us through that early journey and help guide me through whether we need to raise money, just use our own cash to fund it, or or what we needed to do. So yeah, it was a wild start, that's for sure.
Yeah, good to hear about Viatech. Viatech is one of the many organizations in this region that actually grew out of this Chamber of Commerce. It was a committee of the Chamber. And then as the tech sector grew, it came to stand on its own. Same with Destination Greater Victoria. Tourism started with the Chamber, a few others. So, okay, so that's a cool thing. So this might be kind of an obvious question, but when we see really cool companies like yours operating, why are you operating in Victoria?
Oh, geez. Yeah, it's almost like a why not operate in
Yeah.
Victoria? It's such a beautiful place, but I mean, beyond that, we have access to incredible engineers and incredible people, having the university right at our fingertips. I volunteer a lot with the computer science program, the business programs there, and I get to help mentor some of the students that are in there. And you just see the talent that's coming out is just absolutely outrageous. But as well, you have some of the bigger companies around where they've got their satellite offices here in Victoria. You really get these folks that are very lifestyle driven and have a very strong passion around the environment and the ocean that are located here in Victoria, which is the perfect combination for us. You need a nerd that loves the environment, and you got Barnacle and you got Victoria.
We actually should be clear. You're actually in Oak Bay. You're not in Victoria or Saint John.
That's true. That's true.
Which is one more thing that makes Oak Bay all that much cooler. Okay, so what we want to do is now talk about exactly what are these products, what do they look like, and what do they do. We're going to do that next. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Brandon Wright. He is the CEO of a company called Barnacle Systems. So you've got this whole matrix universe of things. I guess it depends on what sector you're working in. We'll unpack that in a minute too and talk about what you do with military and Coast Guard and all that stuff. So how many different products do you actually create?
Yeah. So in reality, we only have three SKUs. So three products, physical products, where we've designed the circuit board and the enclosure and all the software around it. But then we've modified those so that we have a few side quests that we've been on essentially. And what we have is the Barnacle. That's our original product. We have the Barnacle Blue, which is a more recent product for larger yachts. Then we have the Barnacle Black, which is our military grade version that's being used by government and militaries, both locally and internationally.
Okay, as I said, we're going to come back to that too in just a second here. But
Yep, of course.
so your sort of incident that made this happen was that you dragged anchor rather. So that was something that was unintentional on your part. It was sort of a nature thing. On the other hand, I think a lot of people realize that they need security on board their boat for criminal reasons, so that they don't get stolen, they don't get vandalized or broken into or anything like that. What's the balance between the two?
Yeah. So what we found is it really depends on your geography, actually. Let's start with that. So we sell into 40 countries around the world at this point with our recreational products for recreational yachting. And you get a place like Victoria where maybe security and surveillance isn't really a priority, but then you go to Florida, or you're a cruiser where you're going through different waterways where maybe they're not as safe. Folks that are going to maybe Trinidad or to other parts of the Caribbean where they're not as friendly at the moment. That's where we find a high priority of folks that want to add our laser sensor on their aft deck, so that if someone boards their vessel, generates an alert, it can turn on a siren, turn on strobe lights, record video, send you an alert to your smartphone. The whole thing, the whole world explodes in those events. But what most people focus on is the health of their boat while they're away. So this would be their bilge pumps. Those are the pumps that are keeping water off of your boat. They want to monitor how frequently their bilge pump is running so they can determine if the boat's trying to sink itself, or if the batteries are starting to die. It's similar if you leave your car sitting for a very long time, your batteries are eventually going to die, or if you leave your lights on, or if you make a mistake, you can generate all those alerts. So we go from not just the theft and security, but the actual security and health of the boat. But yeah, our very first capture of a burglar was on a boat in France on a large catamaran. And that was fairly early on in the life of Barnacle. It was, I think, late 2018, and we got a text mess, or an email rather, that had an ominous title that my boat had been broken into. And for me, early on, I was like, "Oh my gosh! Like, did the system not work? Is this person mad or whatever?" And it turned out that the system had actually detected the person, scared the person off, captured photographs, and that person ended up getting apprehended while the boat owner was in the United States and the boat was in France. So it was a really interesting use case and really helped to actually spur us on as well too.
Yeah, I mean, years ago, when someone owned a boat on a regular basis, they would say to you, "All right, I have to go check on the boat." Right?
Yep.
That's where you find out whether there's been a break-in or whether there's a flood underway or the bilge pump isn't working. So in that case in France, for example, the alarm was triggered.
Mhm.
Who picked up the alarm? Who were the ones that responded?
Yeah, so there was an audible, like physical alarm on the boat, which freaked out the person, and they dashed for it. They got the boat owner received a text message to their smartphone. They received an email as well, and it included all the details of a laser sensor went off, a photo was taken. Here's all the details, and then that boat owner was able to act. But there's a lot of cases where boat owners will have kind of like a yacht maintenance company where they'll come on and clean the boat periodically for them. There's a lot of times where the boat owner will give access to the Barnacle app to those individuals as well, and they'll help monitor the boat and receive the alert themselves. So yeah, but in that particular instance, it was just the boat owner was able to act quickly and sent the photo off to the police, and the police in France were like, yeah, we know who this is. And I can't believe that you've actually got a photo. You've proven that he's been on, so we can actually do something about it. Where in the past, they assumed that it was this individual, but never had the evidence to actually do that.
The difference in other parts of the world. You mentioned that there are some places that are less safe or more safe than others. Where else in the world do you have product?
Oh, geez. We're we're all over the place. South Africa, all over Asia, the Caribbean, obviously a very large footprint down there. But our biggest markets are France, Italy, Spain, and then obviously our big brothers and sisters down south. We have quite a few dealers down there. I mean, we have 9 dealers in Florida within a 15-minute drive of each other, I would say. So yeah, with our recreational product, it's literally a box that you buy off the shelf, and then generally we have a marine electrician or a dealer that installs it for you out there.
How do these folks in other countries find you?
Yeah, so with Barnacle as an early stage startup, we didn't have a lot of money, right? We had to generate our own cash flow. And one of the things that my wife had done very well was she was a social media influencer, essentially. She had an Instagram account called Rad Girls, and she grew that to hundreds of thousands of followers where she got these brand deals. And she really inspired me to then find influencers in the sailing and yachting community. And so our early strategy for marketing of Barnacle was to partner with YouTubers that are celebrity sailors, essentially. So Sailing Delos, Tula's Endless Summer, uh, like La Vagabond, like all these different groups where they've got millions of followers. They're living their best life. They're touring around the world. We sent them free units. They would go and disappear because they're sailors and you never hear from them again, or they just kind of randomly pop up and say, "Hey, I'm in town." and and what ended up happening was they would pop up and they'd say, "Hey, I'm at a beach bar in wherever in the Caribbean, a beautiful spot. My boat's at anchor, and I'm checking on my boat using the Barnacle remote monitoring system." And they'd show a screenshot of the app, and they'd show how they use it and how it's benefited them. And then all of a sudden, we get an order in, say, South Africa, and then Central America, and all over, and we started growing exponentially as a result of this marketing strategy. And it really allowed us to expand without having to physically go to these locations.
We are dying to find out about what you do with government and military. We're going to talk about that next. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Brandon Wright. He's the CEO of Barnacle Systems that provides security for marine going vessels. So, what do you do with the military? What kind of stuff that you can talk
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. So the stuff that I can tell you about, one of the things that we've been doing is we install our systems on RCMP and DFO vessels. So when there's an enforcement event, they want to be able to record all the video, all the vessel data, the GPS position, all the data that you would expect to be on a, say, a police vehicle to know where they are, but for your boat. So with these different enforcement agencies, they can essentially review any enforcement activity. They can log the performance of the boat, but they can also use it as evidence to say, hey, this is what we were doing at this time. And to be honest, for us at Barnacle, we were surprised that it didn't already exist on enforcement style vessels. Police have trackers in their cars and all this different equipment, but they just didn't have it for their boats. So we found that niche, and we were really excited to be able to satisfy that. And that allowed us to also grow into Royal Canadian Navy, and now we're going to be out with the U.S. Marines. Had a call with the U.S. Coast Guard here a couple hours ago. Got a lot of really interesting opportunities there, but they buy a more militarized product from us that has a very large hard drive built in. We're pulling in all their engine data from the large ships. So the boats that you might see way offshore there, we're pulling in power system data, generator data, environmental data. Uh, what is it? Environmental data in particular is the carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, like all the emissions data. So that way they can understand their carbon footprint as they're going, and use that data to also understand if they pull back on the throttle or if they optimize other operations, maybe they can reduce their carbon footprint as they're moving around. So those are our primary military and defense applications right now.
You have something on your website that talks about whole body vibration. That's kind of a really cool image, but tell me about that.
Yeah. So that one we can't get super deep into, but that was with Canada's Special Forces. And so what we've learned is with CanSoftCom, they would have missions where they would be going like whatever 50 knots, full throttle down as fast as they possibly can on a go fast boat. So one of the boats with the inflatable tubes on it and just a bunch of seats and a bunch of guys and gals that are going somewhere where no one really wants to be. And what we learned is that as they were going, they wouldn't care what the environmental conditions were. They may be going through really rough seas and they're just smashing the boat through this environment. And as a result, even though they'd have shock absorbing seats, those shock absorbing seats would bottom out and then they'd get a shock up their spine and up into their head. And there were instances where some of these individuals would get knocked out as they were going to their destination. And so the researchers, they want to understand the long-term effects. They want to understand the current operation of the vessel. And we've integrated with a body-worn and head-worn sensor that allows them to record all the health of the boat, but also record the health of the individuals on the boat. So we're doing the whole body vibration analysis in real time while also providing the real-time status of the vessel while it's moving in whatever mission they're trying to do.
Yeah, we did a podcast, one of these chamber chats, actually with Titan Boats, who make a lot of
Yeah.
those ones, right? That happens around here as well. And the Coast Guard, you mentioned working with the Coast Guard. The West Coast Coast Guard for Canada is based here in Victoria, and we have a chamber chat podcast with them as well. Can you tell me the stuff that you're doing with fishing, with the fishing fleets and the seafood
Yeah.
industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really neat partnership that we have with another company here in town that I'm assuming will maybe one day be on a chamber chat if they haven't already, is Archipelago.
Hmm.
They're a 40-year-old business, Archipelago Marine Research. I believe they've officially rebranded as just straight Archipelago now, but another Victoria-based company. And in the very early days, Gord Snell, their CEO, at the time, he was a director or VP of product, but he approached us saying that they were interested in a small monitoring device that they wanted to white label. And that was really helpful for us in the early days where we white labeled our product and created some customized code for them within the product so that they could do fisheries enforcement monitoring. And that's been their business for 40 years, where they would normally have an at-sea observer on a vessel where they're confirming whether you're accidentally catching a turtle as opposed to a salmon or whatever the thing may be. But it's too expensive for the fisheries, the skippers, to actually have an at-sea observer on the boat. And so instead, by offering a small hardware device that's on there that replaces the at-sea observer, it allows those fisheries, the more artisanal fishing fleets, to expand, have more boats, and then have a hardware product that satisfies the requirement for DFO and international standards.
Great. You're also doing some particular things with some First Nations. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that's the project that I am just so thrilled about. And one product that we built, it was one of the side quests that I hinted maybe earlier, is we developed a product for the Canadian Coast Guard to monitor wrecked, abandoned, and derelict vessels. And so it's a box that you place on board a hazardous vessel, and it remotely monitors the attitude of the boat. So if the boat begins to sink, if the boat has an intruder on board, if the boat is dragging anchor, but it had to do it fully autonomously without requiring power from the boat because these boats don't have healthy systems or anything. So we provide a solar panel and a very simple array of sensors that can be deployed within a few minutes. And so we did an initial deployment with the Canadian Coast Guard, and we were out in Desolation Sound. It was a 130 some odd foot derelict freighter vessel. It was just very surprising to see that this is what was considered a derelict vessel, because it was huge and quite frightening of the risk that it had on the environment. And it was in this beautiful area, no cell reception. It had been abandoned, and they deployed our system. And they explained to me that previously they'd have to call the First Nations, because they're the ones local to that boat, to say, hey, like, is the boat sinking? Yes or no? How's it looking? The nations, the indigenous peoples would respond and say, here's the status of the boat. Here's how it's behaving. And maybe you should look at it. Maybe it's fine. I don't know. But we heard this over and over again, and we ended up with a national contract here in Canada for remotely monitoring derelict, abandoned, hazardous boats with the Canadian Coast Guard, which is a huge, amazing opportunity for us, and we're so proud of. But we learned that the Coast Guard was quite overwhelmed with the number of boats that they had to remotely monitor. And I remembered that they kept referring back to how they would call the people in the Indigenous communities to check on these boats for them. And we thought, well, what if, since our product is extremely simple to deploy, what if we empowered the nations to be the ones to actually go and deploy the systems themselves, generate their own revenue stream, and charge it back to the Coast Guard, and actually have a real opportunity to protect their traditional territory, their traditional lands? And so that's what we've done. And it's almost like an emotional experience for me. And so now we've empowered, I believe it was 5 nations where we've trained them and certified them for use with the Barnacle system. They were certified with the Canadian Coast Guard. It was spearheaded by the Sauk First Nation. And now we're slowly rolling this out with the support of Can Do, which is an economic development office for First Nations, and really finding ways to support the Canadian Coast Guard, support the Indigenous peoples, and empower them to have their own businesses where those businesses are protecting their traditional waters, and then leveraging our technology that we've developed to help support all that. So I don't know, it's the greatest thing. I'm so pleased, and I can't believe that it's actually been working the way we dreamed it would.
There's so much more we could talk about, but of course we're out of time, so we'll have to do that another time. But listen, thanks for everything, Brandon. We appreciate you being here today. Brandon Wright is the CEO of Barnacle Systems and a member in good standing of the Chamber of Commerce. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.